So welcome. Thanks everyone for joining. We are recording this in case folks want to be able to view it later as a reference, or they were unable to participate today and asked that it be recorded. So I appreciate your willingness to join today. I do want to give a quick shout out to Haiti, my partner in this effort in getting things, all things 30 by 30 accomplished. And then our wonderful presenter, Nate Roth, who's with the Department of Conservation. I will be giving him a brief introduction, very brief, so that he has time to jump into his presentation. And in order for questions to be answered, he is going to be pausing at various moments throughout his presentation to allow an opportunity for Q&A. I do ask that you raise your hand, but otherwise keep yourself muted the entire time. So Nate works with the Department of Conservation. He's the Chief Science and Data Advisor, and he has served as the department's Geographic Information Officer and GIS Coordinator, overseeing the department's geographic data publication practices and information technology infrastructure that support them. And he was the liaison for GIS data between Department of Conservation and other state, federal, and local agencies, as well as private and non-governmental organizations. And he joined the Department of Conservation in 2015 as a research program specialist in California Geological Survey, which in that role was assisting with geographic data publication and standardization. He has a PhD and an MA in geography, to shout out to all of our geographers out there, from UC Davis, and a BS in environmental biology and management, also from Davis. So at this point, Nate, I'll go ahead and pass it over to you, and I'll remind everyone to go ahead and mute themselves. And when you have questions, raise your hand, and that's the only time you should be unmuted. So Nate, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. It's always a pleasure to talk with a new group of folks, particularly a group like this that is on the front lines of so much of what we're trying to accomplish. I guess I should probably have also added to that introduction that I've been called over the past couple of years to do what I think of as some of the special projects at our agency level, helping to bring a number of our partners together across the different departments, so the sister departments to the Department of Conservation, on a couple of these efforts that really span all of our primary areas of emphasis. The 30 by 30 is one that I take a great deal of pride in having had a chance to play a role in. It's the conservation of California's landscapes, for biodiversity, for improving our use of these landscapes as another one of our tools in combating climate change, and ensuring that every member of California's population has equitable access to open space. All of these are components that I firmly believe in as a responsibility of the state, and take a great deal of personal pride in helping to move us forward on those. So californianature.ca.gov, what you should be seeing on the shared screen right now is the online GIS that's supporting the state's responses to Governor's Executive Order N8220, more commonly referred to now as the Nature-Based Climate Solutions Executive Order. That executive order has a number of sections and creates a number of mandates for us. Two that I'm going to focus on by name the most today are 30 by 30, as well as the Natural and Working Lands Climate Smart Strategy. The californianature.ca.gov arose out of a partnership between the Natural Resources Agency and volunteer efforts on behalf of Esri. It is based entirely on Esri's online GIS platform, and as a result brings with it a great deal of geospatial capabilities. One of the things we recognized right from the beginning is that it would be really easy for us to create something that was super abstract, that is useful primarily to specialists, or that lacks a level of usability for the broader audiences across California that are going to be instrumental in building and maintaining the will to achieve these ambitious goals. So we've structured the website and pretty much everything within it in a format that allows people to start out simple with it, and then as they choose to progress deeper into the details and interrogate the information more extensively. We call this, called it within our own work, progressive disclosure, basically meaning that as you choose to progress deeper into each of the pieces, we disclose more of the complexities to you, at least up until the point where we said, hey, this is about as far as we can go without throwing enormous amounts of time at building supporting materials on it. And I'll give you a couple examples of where that came in. Progressive disclosure is apparent across the site, both in the web pages, where as you scroll down, you're going to get on each page, you're generally going to get into more complete and complex sets of information. So it's a top down on most of the web page. Simpler at the beginning, and then letting people who choose to take those next steps deeper within it. But I want to jump now into CA Nature. CA Nature is the subsection of californianature.ca.gov that contains all of our interactive components that are there to educate and inform and support you in your pursuit of helping us achieve our 30 by 30 and natural working lands climate smart goals. So again, in the spirit of progressive disclosure, you start with CA Nature. It begins with some basic information on our status embedded right into the web page. Then we get down into story maps. And these story maps are something that, while I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time in them this afternoon, they are there to explain in a somewhat more interactive, at least virtually hands-on form, what 30 by 30 is, what a number of the subject areas are that we're working with and that we're trying to communicate, what the data within them is or are, and how to interact with it. They serve, in essence, as a user guide to our next level of interaction, which are our explorers. And that's where I'm going to spend probably a majority of the time this afternoon. I do encourage you to use these story maps as references, and in particular, if you're interested in interacting with our data in your own projects, in particular, the open data user guide, I think could be a really good starting point for you. So our explorers, in many ways, I think of these as the core of our interactivity to audiences. Actually, before I go on further, do we have any questions so far from folks? I can't actually easily see the chat or the hands up while I'm sharing.
It doesn't look like we have any.
Okay, then I shall keep going. So these explorers, I really do, they're the core of our interactivity with a majority of our audience. I'm going to start with our Conserved Areas Explorer. This is where you begin to engage with the details of the data that we currently recognize as being part of the 30 by 30, the lands that are conserved under our definition of 30 by 30, that we have the data to confirm that they are, and I'll get into that nuance in just a little bit. Where they are, what kind of landscapes they are, and how much of it there is within our tracking at the moment. As before, we start out with an overview, gives you really relatively basic interactivity, that the high level summaries on both our terrestrial and marine conserved areas. And then a map that allows basic interaction with the data that are accounted for within these totals. For most of you that are starting to dive a little bit deeper into the details, I think that this overview page is probably just going to be a short step for you before you move into either the terrestrial detailed or the marine detailed portions of the Explorer. There is a great deal more that you can get into with the detailed versions of the Explorer. For example, in its default view, as you start to dive that little bit deeper, you can begin to see, okay, we've got our gap codes 1 and 2. These are codes adopted out of the U.S. Geological Survey's gap code series, in which gap codes 1 and 2 indicate areas of known strong biodiversity protections implicit within their management structure. There are also gap codes 3 and 4, and I'll get into those in just a minute. But within this default view, you can already start to interact with it. You can click and select on it and say, okay, how much of it is falling into the gap code 1, which is the highest level of biodiversity conservation within its management. The primary differences between 1 and 2, should you be interested, really are in how they deal with either disturbances or the simulation of natural disturbance across those landscapes. So you can see which portions are which. We can start to see, okay, what proportion of those is owned by the state, and so you can start to refine your investigation of these in more detail. Similarly, and this is a little piece that's a little more hidden than I might like, but we did all of this using the existing tools with no fresh code being written in a computer sense of it for this portion of the Explorer. You can start to explore which ones are open and public access versus restricted or no public access, and trying to be upfront about ones that we just don't know what the access looks like. So this is useful. Additional components you can start to filter. Let's say you want to see what do we have in a particular county. You can select a county, and it's going to redraw and refresh to show you what is present within that county relative to our current tracking of 30 by 30. So one little gotcha that I've run into a couple times and had to explain. The gap code 1 and 2, in this case within El Dorado County, this 0.09% that you're seeing here is what portion of the state's total is represented by the areas considered conserved in El Dorado County. Clicking on the county tab will let you see how that's represented within the county. And if you've done selections by our climate regions or by ecoregion, those other tabs will do the same. As it is for the moment, I'm going to clear my selection there. The next piece that I want to demonstrate here is our custom selections. This starts to bring gap codes 3 and 4 into play. Gap code 3 is generally used to identify lands whose management structure, yes, it likely does include biodiversity, but biodiversity is one of multiple mandates associated with the management of that landscape. You'll note that through turning this on, that gap code 3 includes a majority of the state's U.S. Forest Service and BLM lands that are not within wilderness areas or similar other more elevated levels of conservation management. Gap code 4 is absolutely worth noting, particularly with an audience such as yourselves. Gap code 4 indicates an area with no known, and I want to put an emphasis on the known because that's known within our databases, not known as in terms of what you recognize in your landscapes, or honestly what even we could identify from doing a search on a specific property. This, in my view, and this is the way I choose to present it, other folks within the agency may give a slightly different spin on it. These gap code 4, a great many of them probably deserve on review to get moved up into one of these other categories. And we are soliciting input for that, for a process that we're really just getting kicked off on. It's available through our open data for updating a conservation area, requesting a review of properties that you or an organization that you're affiliated with, or maybe even one that you just happen to know more about, think, hey, that shouldn't be a 4 or that shouldn't be a 3. It should be up in that category 1 or 2. This will link you to a survey where you can provide some contact information for us to start to initiate a review of that so that we can get it into our foundational data that underpins not just CA Nature's categorization, but the data that's used by the Department of Fish and Wildlife, CAL FIRE, Department of Conservation, of course, and that feeds into many, many other data processes. One of the reasons for that is as we were assembling CA Nature, we realized that we ran a real risk of creating a dead end for improved data if we collected it and fed it just into CA Nature and our data systems. So instead, we've very intentionally tried to set things up so that they feed into the California Protected Areas database, the California Conservation Easement database, so that they can be used by anybody who is already using those data or wishes to use those data without needing to do any reassembly or backtracking of our data into those. So back to the detailed piece of it.
Nate, can we pause for a second and you give a little bit more explanation on the gap codes and what they might mean? Okay,
that sounds good. So gap code, here, let me actually use why don't I do it the way we intended to? So on each one of our explorers, you'll notice there may be a couple tabs across the top. One of them is the help tab. And that will actually take you straight into the story map that will let you look through our data a little bit more. And so we can start to look at the gap codes that we're using. And we have a downloadable section that's a more detailed view of it. But in simple summary, our gap codes 1 through 4 are represented. 1 and 2 currently being counted as 30 by 30 conservation areas. These are areas with permanent protections from conservation. In the case of gap code 1, where natural disturbances are generally allowed to proceed without interference or may be mimicked through management. And gap code 2 is very similar, but may include more suppression of sets of disturbances or other things. An example that we include here are invasive species or, native insect outbreaks that may move beyond the bounds of a natural system, a process we'd expect to see naturally in the system. Gap codes 3, again, have permanent protections, but may be subject to extractive uses for logging, may have OHV recreation, could be some mineral usage within them. And then there's gap code 4, no known public or private institutional mandates for the biodiversity within those. They can allow some additional levels of conversion to non-natural land covers, or as is the case with a great many of ours, we simply don't know and have documentation within the underlying systems of a biodiversity mandate associated with them. Does that help get us, build us up to the point where we need to be?
Yes, I think so. Thank you for doing that. And so one really easy way to meet 30 by 30 is to check to see if properties your organization might be affiliated with are categorized, maybe incorrectly, in the gap 3 or 4 level when they should be in the gap 1 or 2 level. Is that right?
That's absolutely correct. We've got we are at this point at around 24% of the state. Based on some very back of the envelope calculations, because we don't know for sure what we're going to get. We've got at least a couple more percentage points of the state's land area that we suspect is sitting there, either in a gap code 4 or maybe just outside of our current tracking systems, that makes a really significant inroad with probably little to no true management change as gap within the data that we would love to get filled in.
Great, thank you. So this feels like it might be a good opportunity to pause and see if anyone has any questions on what you've covered so far. So go ahead, folks. Either enter a question into the chat and I can read it, or if you have one, raise your hand and then you can unmute. And we'll pause for a second and see if anyone jumps forward. I'm not seeing anything. Oh, here's a question. Oh, couple. First question is this data from CPAD? And you may want to explain what CPAD is. And then there's another question as well. So I'll let you answer that one first.
So CPAD is foundational to our assembly of this data set. It is brought together with the California Conservation Easement Database, U.S. Protected Areas Database, because they have some they have some complementary components to them, along with additional records on wilderness areas, areas of conservation emphasis, and some other components like wild and scenic rivers and their surrounding areas, in order to build what we call the California Conservation Conserved Areas data set. So when I mention that doing the filling out that survey to highlight properties that you think deserve to be reclassified, what we're actually doing is routing those to improve the California Protected Areas database, the California Conservation Easement database, and by proxy, since those feed to the US Protected Areas database, we're trying to propagate those changes not just to one data set, but through the entire suite of data that's being used, not just by us, but by a much, much larger set of stakeholders.
Great, thank you. There was another question about putting the gap list in the chat. I will do that as we proceed forward, so Robin, watch for that. Austin's asking, what's the best way to address gap code change requests? So maybe if you can go back to that screen for submitting the change, that would be helpful.
So the main place to bring that in is through, it's kind of tucked away a little bit, though I keep, it's tucked away in the open data and I just missed it myself there. This updating a conservation area one. When you click on this, it will open a new survey that, well, this is that survey where you'll be able to give contact information for the organization, what the holding is, who owns the holding, its management, what type of ownership it has associated with it, and at least sort of some entry points into evidence that would support a change in its conservation status within the databases. So something that we've run into, and we designed this survey as we were assembling it, and we've discovered that there's at least one piece that it doesn't fit perfectly. If you've got multiple properties you're trying to submit all at once, don't try to submit a single record for each one of them. Try to drop this point on the map sort of central to all of them. If the holdings are statewide, then don't worry about trying to pin it down too precisely. And let us know that it's a single submission that's looking at initiating a broader review of some organizations' holdings across a wider region and larger number of properties.
Great, thank you. I don't see any other questions in the chat or any hands up, so keep going.
Okay, there is the marine conserved areas are less detailed in the data that we have associated with them. There are ongoing discussions related to expanding what's currently considered conserved under 30 by 30. What is considered conserved at the moment are defined by the state's marine protected areas. You can explore a lot of the other protections that overlap the state's coastal waters. And that to be honest about it, represent areas that, following discussions with the National Oceanographic, with NOAA and other conservation organizations, both public and private, that may have a role to play. Some more of these may in a role similarly to what's happening with that Gap Code 4. May be moved into considered conserved, but there's a great deal of opportunity here, particularly within some confined areas. One of the challenges that we absolutely recognize is that just because you've conserved 30% does not necessarily mean of the area, does not necessarily equate to 30% of all biodiversity. And we definitely are trying to keep that in mind to ensure that meeting the letter of a requirement does not have us all giving a pat on our back while ignoring some of the realities of the rest of it. So moving on, our next of the explorers that I'd like to highlight, our Biodiversity Explorer is a really there's a lot under this one that is exciting to look at. Many of you may be familiar with the Department of Fish and Wildlife's Areas of Conservation Emphasis, or ACE data set. It includes somewhere in excess of 20 layers. I don't remember the number off the top of my head, that are nested within each other and allow for some level of rolling up to give high-level summaries, but then let people dive in a bit deeper into the data to explore it in more detail. Department of Fish and Wildlife has an absolutely astounding viewer of the base set of ACE data sets. But one of the things that we realized is that there's a lot of complexity in those that isn't necessarily visible when you're flipping from one layer to the next layer. So we took on that challenge, and I think we've done a really interesting job of it in starting to bring more of these layers together into one place and allow for folks to look through those layers a little bit. So you'll notice that there's this circular, I'll call it an area of interest. You can drag that around the map. And as you do so, these bar charts on the left side update to represent the areas within this circle. And what it's showing you sort of stacked from left to right. So like you may be able, you see there's a rank 1 all the way up to rank 5. Those represent from rank low at the low end to 5 at the high end, the relative value within those areas for the criteria listed on the layer. So in this case, this area that we're looking at here for overall, so the full roll up of everything on species biodiversity, has precious little of the rank 1, if any at all, where I just happened to have dropped it. A small amount of our rank 2 all the way up through a majority being in rank 4, and a slightly smaller amount in the rank 5 for species biodiversity. So clicking on these dots, you can rotate through which one you're viewing underneath it. So you'll note that the charts did not change, but our visualization of it did as I moved to a terrestrial biodiversity. Similarly, some of these have nice little expansions on them. So in addition to terrestrial biodiversity, you can see that the terrestrial biodiversity is a roll up of a similar set of indexes ranked 1 to 5 of native species richness, rarity weighted richness, and irreplaceability of those species. So you can rotate through each of these that you may wish to. I'm going to focus in on native species richness for just a moment. And then continuing that ability to dive in a little bit deeper, there's an additional set of charting and information based on the specifics of the layer that you have selected that will let you see within this area of interest what's the distribution of those rank types and the number of what's the sets of species counts within it by type, and where is that relative to the state average as represented by this green dot. The charting that you see here is created specifically for each one of the layers. For example, if we look at terrestrial specific habitats, it will drop that charting and start to tell you which ones of the terrestrial significant habitat, as identified by the Department of Fish and Wildlife, sort of what is their representation within that area.
Nate, we have a question
Yeah.
from Barbara about how is irreplaceability calculated?
I'm going to defer that question. I'll try to hunt down the more detailed answer for that. I normally defer that one to one of the Fish and Wildlife folks that actually builds that data to make sure that you're getting correct answer.
Got it. And how current is this information?
So the area of conservation emphasis tends to get an update or two every calendar year pushed out by the Department of Fish and Wildlife based on their integration of new records from existing data sets that are feeding into it, or possibly bringing in entirely new collections on species observations or land cover or habitat type map. So it's a couple of times a year on the ACE data set.
I don't see any other questions or hands up, so looks like you've answered everything so far.
Moving along really quick. Habitat and land cover, this one occasionally takes a little while to load in. This one, based on a fairly aggregate grouping of land cover types, shows us what proportion of each one of those grouped land cover types falls into our 30 by 30 conserved areas. You can refilter those. This top one will refilter based on a county you might want to have, leaving the bottom one essentially the full state, so you can compare the two. Or you could do the same based on one of the ecoregions derived from the Bailey's ecoregions to look at it from a more ecological systems related perspective. You can then dive in that a little bit deeper. Let's grab one that's of interest. We'll do conifer forests. Depending on your screen size, you might note that it starts out with slightly different viewable extents. We can start to see the sort of pink highlighting is where these conifer forests are. And if I turn off the, nope, that's the one I didn't want to turn off. You can see this coloration under here. It's called a bivariate choropleth. But what it is a way to look at these landscapes as far as how much there is of, in this case, conifer forest. So its presence along basically the vertical axis within this little charting, and how much of that there is conserved. So we can start to see that these ones in more of the green colors have both high presence and high levels of conservation. Some of these orange ones have high presence, but comparatively lower levels of conservation. And sort of within those 9 basic combinations where all the rest of the breadth of it falls across the state. You can do the same by ecoregion as well. So any questions here before I move on to our next one?
I don't see any hands up and there's nothing in the chat so far.
Okay, so the Climate Explorer will be our next stop. This is another one of those ones where I definitely recommend taking a good look through the supporting story map on it, because there's quite a bit of nuance within it and a fair amount of control that is worth a little bit of hand-holding to get you to what you're interested in. For example, what we're looking at right now, and we can drag this little slider back and forth to hide or reveal sort of the left side, what we're calling the base layer. In this case, it's representing a historic baseline derived from a 1960 to 1990 time frame of 10 climate change ensembles for the maximum average daily temperature. That's being compared right now to that same ensemble of models, but for the end of this century. So what you're seeing here is that historic baseline compared to the changes by end of century under those 10 models. This middle one is the difference between the two of those. So basically subtracting the base layer from the comparison layer. And then across the entire state, we can see where these different levels of change are and how much there is that falls into each of these sort of bands of amount of change within that. We have available the minimum temperatures and average precipitation as well. You can swap out for a much higher emissions scenario set to do a comparison between them. Let's wait for it to draw in. And we can start seeing that the change has gotten far more significant across it between the different emissions scenarios. Should you wish to, you can put in, you can drop a point marker onto the map. These are interactive maps, so you can zoom in significantly further than I just did. And you can start to see the differences between those over time. And if you start to pick from what is one of a pretty wide variety of the more detailed models within them, you can start to get even more detailed charting associated with that individual location, where it'll give you more details on the relative changes you expect. It's doing these calculations essentially live. So it's going to takes a little bit of time, but you can see that as we move from the 30-year average sets shown in the flat bars that show up in here, like these, you start to get, in this case, because we're using a 30-year rolling average, and a little bit more, a more nuanced set of changes. We've also got some information coming in on predicted extreme heat events that might occur through that time and associated with that location. I'm going to hop along really quick because I can see that we're moving through our available time. We have a subset of the sea level rise data that's available through the Cosmos data sets produced by the U.S. Geological Survey, showing expected inundations based on various sets of sea level rise and the sort of strength of storm that's coming in that may impact which areas are inundated over time. And then in further support of our natural and working lands strategies, starting to look at the where we have different types of land cover across the state. And as you start to look at each of those land covers, how much there is, again, filterable by county or by climate region, and what types of strategies may be able to build on those land cover types and reinforce their role as a positive contributor to our state's carbon and other climate change, climate resilience related goals. Any questions on these?
I don't see any hands up One question I have, though, as it relates to kind of any of these interfaces is whether or not you can upload like a shape file or a KML file to actually analyze a property you may be working to protect.
I will get into an option that starts to do that. The ones that I've shown so far don't allow the direct integration of your data into them. However, I'll get into it very briefly. Our open data components will allow you to bring the vast majority of our data into your own analyses, should you wish.
Okay, great. And then it does look like we have 2 questions. We'll start with Tommy. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you, Melanie. I appreciate it. Nanette, I really appreciate the presentation here, and I'm familiar with this program. It's great to see the areas saved for conservation and for forest coverage. You very quickly showed some of the data regarding sea level rise, and that's the project I'm currently working on. Yeah, this picture of the Bay Area. How did you arrive at that particular component of this site?
So these are data. We did not create the data new for this. It is a generalization of the Cosmos data modeled by the U.S. Geological Survey. There is a richer data viewer for these same data available through the Our Coast, Our Future, OCOF, that provides access to a couple additional variables and honestly some really nice supporting information materials.
Okay, great. Thank you.
That cover what you're looking for?
Well, it was more about how do you mechanically get to this page that you're at right now.
Yep. So you're gonna pick the to get here. You pick the Climate Explorer, and then up here along the top, just this sea level rise button.
Thank you, Nate. I appreciate it.
And then Robin, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Oh, there I am. Sorry. Nate, thank you for such an impressive presentation. It's stunning. I've never seen such stuff. It's incredible. And thank you for all your work. So I have a question. I hope it's not too. What I'm struggling with here is, in view of the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis, which are 2 sides of one coin, of course, is it possible we're going to get to the understanding that a working landscape has to be a place where biodiversity and carbon can be stored, whether it's large or small? Are we ever going to consider those lands as being functioning as a natural climate solution? Or are we just looking at the big pieces here? I mean, it's really impressive, of course, to know that we have all these big pieces, but one thing that I'm very concerned about is us missing the fact that the deserts sequester a lot of carbon.
Yeah. So there's a couple pieces to your question that I want to answer. Our natural and working landscapes, regardless of their type, are something that we consider essential in our climate related goals, whether it's the sequestering of carbon, sort of the new sequester and storage of carbon, or the protecting existing stores of carbon within them, whether it be organic carbon or inorganic. I mean, one of the things that people I like to note is there's almost someone a while ago put out a figure saying 90% of the state is natural and working land. I personally detest that number is being used, because and this is me a little bit on my soapbox. With the addition of our urban forest components into what we're considering it, virtually all of the state, including our urban areas, has potential under that definition to contribute to it. And I wish and try within my own work to emphasize those potentials. One of the other ones we've run into, and this is a little bit of a definitional challenge, and I'm going to just try to skate through it really quick so I can move on to a couple of the last pieces, is that we have a couple different ways of categorizing the landscapes. We used one that's based on land cover, which includes things such as our woodlands, our forests, the desert shrub, desert woodland, other forms of shrub across the landscape, in addition to our barren and other categories, all of which are pieces of what we classically think of as desert and desert ecosystems. And so through our selection of using land cover for defining those, we've honestly done a little bit of a disservice to a more a pure definition that integrates across those into what you might consider to be a desert per se. They are all in here, they are all important. We just don't really show something where we can say, this is desert writ larger, and this is the role that it has to play for us. But I assure you, we definitely do include it within our thinking of the roles that the entirety of the state has to play. Okay, I want to skip along really quick. Our Access Explorer is one that I'm expecting is going to get updated substantially based on the outcomes from the Outdoors for All initiative that's really just starting to get underway within the Natural Resources Agency. What we've done here is allow for some basic summaries of demographics, assuming basically a half-mile distance from the place of residence to either, in this case, what we're looking at here, any of the publicly accessible open spaces, or if we swap it out, for any of the publicly accessible ones that meet our 30 by 30 conservation definition. There are many ways that this could be, and I hope is improved within our next generation of this one, but it provides some really illustrative examples of who has access to these sets of open spaces. There are, if you dive into it a little bit, and you can filter by county and by city, there are some really interesting patterns in terms of age, income, ethnicity within who has access to those around the state, that are, illustrations of some of the challenges we have in front of us in ensuring that our efforts are equitably distributed across all Californians. I'm going to take a very quick stop by our open data. Virtually every piece of data that we have for use within CA Nature is available for you or your GIS tech or someone else that may be of interest, is available for you to work with directly. So for example, I can take this 30 by 30 conserved areas for the terrestrial layer. I can take that. If you've got somebody that's oriented that way, you can grab the, this is called a REST endpoint. It's basically a fancy form of a URL that will allow them to drop that layer into your own set of web mapping. Similarly, you could go in and you can start creating your own map using it, and as soon as it finishes drying in, this one's actually it'll dry, and it's actually going to tell me that, hey, you got more pieces than you can really attach. You can really look at it one time. But this data is here and available for you and your staff to make use of. And this is exactly the same data set that is used within the dashboards that you showed earlier and within the calculations in our reporting. Okay. Any questions on that, though? Admittedly, the the open data could get real deep real quick.
Nope, I don't see any hands up.
Okay, the last piece that I want to get into is our opportunities model, and I'm going to just only go ever so briefly into it. This is an opportunity for you to do your own analysis, and this is the one where, though I won't demo it, you can start to bring in some of your own data and show it in here, as opposed to the open data, which does the reverse. Let's say you've got a set of priorities that you're interested in. Maybe I'm interested in the habitat and land cover, and habitat, some connectivity, and someone mentioned irreplaceability previously. You can select some of those layers. I can configure some basic information on how valuable I think the independent components within that data set are. I'm going to just leave these as defaults for now. You can say, I think that one is worth 50% of what's my priorities, 30 and 20. Obviously, if I were doing this for other purposes, I would probably have that fun debate on what those really ought to be. And then I can click and run an analysis, and in literally seconds, I can have access to results that tell me sort of where the high values from each of these start to overlap with each other, which may indicate areas sort of opportunities where multiple factors come together. These are the same data sets that the state's using for very similar sets of activities. It will allow you to put your own ideas onto a map and start to think through what they may mean in the longer term. Okay, with that, let's give just a little opportunity for some questions before I'm unfortunately going to need to roll along to a next session or a next meeting with some other folks in just a few minutes. I'm not going to cut it off right at 3.
Great. So raise your hand if you have a question, drop something into the chat and I can read it. I'm not seeing anything just yet. I appreciate the information though, very helpful, and hopefully this is a tool that folks even without GIS skills could at least play with.
That's our goal. I mean, I'm not so presumptive as to think that folks that don't have a little bit of the thinking process evolved that we express in GIS would be immediately able to jump into the deep end of this one. But it takes away the need for having the software and having the prior skills and having access to downloaded versions of all of these data, and lets you dive right into it.
Marcia, I see you've unmuted yourself. Do you have a question? Oh.
No, I wasn't unmuted, I don't think.
Oh, yep, it showed on my end. Let's see. I don't see anyone else. Just a compliment that this is wonderful. Thanks to Nate and Melanie for opening this to all interested. All right, well, hopefully, Nate, you answered everybody's questions, but if not, they can spend some time playing with the website, California Nature, and We appreciate your time, everyone, for joining us. And Nate, your time, I will be posting this to the Hills for Everyone YouTube channel, and we'll send out a link so you can refer back to it. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.